She reserved my lake mansion without asking and staged a 100-guest party around my late wife's ashes like it was a centerpiece. I came home to white van string lights and a forged digital contract bearing my name perfect, except for one microscopic mistake that was about to cost an entire HOA 6 figures. I'm Ethan Cole, a retired litigator turned quiet carpenter, and Maple Point was supposed to be where I learned how to breathe again. Instead, a crown-wearing HOA Karen broke into my grief and tried to call it community spirit. So here's the promise. I'll show you how one timestamp, one metadata crumb, and one very public lie snapped her scepter in 3 minutes flat. You'll see the trap, the receipts, and the moment the gavel lands. This is my story: calm voice, sharp edges, and a doorbell camera that never blinks. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from and your local time, and if you like justice served cold, hit subscribe so you won't miss the final twist. When I first bought the lake mansion at Maple Point, I wasn't looking for luxury. I was looking for quiet. After Eleanor passed, the walls of our old home echoed too loud. The creak of floorboards, the hollow sound of her missing laughter, it all became unbearable. So I packed up 30 years of law books and tools, drove south, and bought a half-collapsed estate that everyone else had given up on. The neighbors called it the haunted boathouse. I called it therapy with a mortgage. Every nail I drove, every plank I replaced felt like building peace one board at a time. I documented everything: permits, receipts, inspection reports, time-stamped photos. Old habits die hard when you've spent 3 decades in litigation. My peace, quite literally, was built on paperwork. The HOA here, Maple Point Lakeside, was infamous even by North Carolina standards, bylaws longer than the state constitution, and a president named Brenda Markham, a woman who treated her title like a royal decree. Most people avoided buying here because of her. I bought precisely because of her. I figured a neighborhood that obsessed over rules would protect my solitude. Turns out it only protected Brenda's ego. 6 months into renovations, I'd restored the house's bones, refinished oak floors, rebuilt the wraparound porch, and even obtained a county permit to operate as a short-term rental if I ever chose to. I didn't plan to use it, but it gave me options. Options meant control, and for someone like me, a man who lost everything once, control was the only way to sleep at night. Then came the email that cracked the calm. "Hi, Ethan," it began, dripping honey and poison. "The neighbors and I were wondering if we could hold a small welcome committee get-together at your beautiful new home. It would mean so much for community spirit." Brenda's tone was polite, but if you've ever dealt with a Karen, you know small means chaos, and community spirit means you're paying for it. I typed back quickly but respectfully. "Hi, Brenda, thank you for the kind words. The house isn't ready for guests yet. I'm still finishing some interior work. Also, my late wife's urn is still in the living room, so I'm not ready to host events at this time. Short, professional, airtight. I even kept a copy in my sent folder because old lawyers never delete evidence." I figured that was the end of it. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store for wood stain. When I came back, my quiet gravel road was lined with white vans, balloons, and a big printed sign: Maple Point Welcome Event. This way. I froze. My first thought wasn't anger, it was disbelief. Then the dread hit me. I sprinted up the driveway, and there it was, my front door, wide open tables set up beside Eleanor's urn, and strangers stringing lights over the porch beams I had just repainted. A man in a chef's coat smiled at me. "You must be the owner. Don't worry, we'll be done before 5. Karen said, "Everything's approved, Karen." Of course. Around here, every Brenda has a little Karen inside her. I told them to stop. "There's been a mistake. No one has permission to be here." The caterer frowned, scrolling on his phone. It says right here, you signed off. Contract and all." He turned the screen toward me, my name, my digital signature, and my address. It was flawless. The problem: I'd never seen that contract in my life. In that moment, something inside me switched. Grief turned to precision. I walked to the gate, swung it shut, and locked it with a satisfying metallic click. Then I turned back to the caterer and said evenly, "You've been misled. You have 10 minutes to clear my property before I call the sheriff. You'll want to send that invoice to Brenda Markham." They left without argument, probably used to HOA drama, but not to being told they were part of a forgery. Inside, I sat at the oak table I'd built myself and stared at the glowing screen. That digital signature, it was my old one. The same style I'd used for legal filings for decades. Which meant Brenda had somehow lifted it from public court records or scanned it from an old HOA form. For most people, that would be terrifying. For me, it was an invitation. I've spent a lifetime chasing liars across depositions. Every forgery has a fingerprint, not on the paper, but in the data, the metadata. So I called my niece, Trish Nguyen, a paralegal in Raleigh, and said, "Trish, I've got a live one. HOA forgery, bad signature, probably PDF metadata mismatch. Can you take a look? She didn't even ask for details. Forward it. I'll call you in an hour. While I waited, I examined the file myself. Years in court teach you that every fake is lazy somewhere. The contract claimed to be created on April 10th, but I noticed the embedded fonts were older versions, the kind discontinued in March. My gut told me the file was backdated. When Trish called, her voice was half amusement, half outrage. Uncle Ethan, this woman's an amateur. The file's metadata shows it was created March 15th, 2:32 p.m., and edited again April 10th. She forged the contract weeks before she ever asked permission. She planned the crime before sending the email. That was all I needed to hear. I opened a new folder labeled Evidence, Markham Case. Inside, I saved everything: screenshots, metadata logs, email headers, and a photo of the forged contract open on my screen. My hands were steady. My pulse was calm. Because I knew something Brenda didn't: when you forge a document on a lawyer's house, you don't start a party, you start a case. I stepped out onto the porch. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the water gold. And right there in that perfect evening light, I made a quiet vow, not of revenge, but of restoration. I was going to rebuild peace, the same way I rebuilt this house, one nail, one clause, one line of evidence at a time. Brenda had turned my sanctuary into her playground. Now she'd become my next renovation project. The next day, my inbox pinged again, this time from the HOA board. Dear Mr. Cole, it began your refusal to host the pre-approved event constitutes a violation of Section 14.3 of the HOA bylaws. Daily fines of $2,000 will accrue until the event is held as planned. I laughed out loud, the kind of laugh that sounds like thunder right before a storm breaks. They thought they could fine me for refusing to host a trespass. Perfect. Every email they sent was another brick in their own coffin. I walked over to Eleanor's urn, placed my hand on the polished wood, and whispered, "Honey, you'd love this part. They just signed their own Exhibit A." Because in law, timing is everything, and Brenda had just handed me hers. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry, anger burns too fast, but because my brain wouldn't stop drafting. When you've practiced law long enough, you start thinking in exhibits and cross-examinations even while brushing your teeth. I sat in my study, the glow of the laptop casting a pale light on the wood-paneled walls, and started building my case, like I'd built this house carefully, methodically, piece by piece. The first step was the forged contract itself. It looked immaculate: legal headers, signature block rental terms, even an HOA event approval page. But a forgery always screams if you know how to listen. I opened the file's Properties tab, creation date March 15th. Last modified April 10th. The email Brenda sent the caterers said attach the signed agreement from Mr. Cole, and it was dated April 10th, meaning she'd sent a contract 3 weeks before she even asked for permission. That's like finding a check dated next month with a cashed stamp already on it. I called Trish back. So what's the best way to preserve this metadata without them claiming tampering? She chuckled. PDF Inspector screenshots. Take one full screen with your desktop clock visible, then email the file to yourself. Gmail timestamps are admissible because they can't be altered retroactively. That way, even if she deletes the original, you've got a server record proving it existed tonight. That girl deserved a raise. By dawn, I had 4 exhibits labeled and cataloged. Exhibit A, forged rental contract with visible metadata mismatch. Exhibit B, email headers proving creation predates communication. Exhibit C, HOA violation notice, demanding $2,000 daily fines. Exhibit D, video stills from my doorbell cam showing Brenda never visited. I printed backups. Because the cloud is great, but a paper binder never crashes. By 7 a.m., I walked down my driveway, the lake fog curling around my boots like smoke. The water was calm, eerily calm, the way it gets before a storm front rolls in. I sipped black coffee from a chipped mug and thought about Brenda. In any courtroom, there are 2 types of liars: the ones who bluff because they're scared, and the ones who bluff because they think they're untouchable. Brenda was the second type. And that's the kind who never sees the punch coming until it's already landed. The HOA email had mentioned verbal consent. That was my next target. If they wanted to claim we had a conversation, fine, I'd let my Nest doorbell testify. I opened the app, filtered the last 60 days, and watched a silent parade of proof delivery men, my neighbor Jerry, dropping off fishing bait, even a raccoon that tried to steal a sandwich off my porch. But not once did I see Brenda Markham or anyone from her board at my door. I saved the entire footage log to an external drive, encrypted it, and uploaded a second copy to Trish's secure Dropbox. Digital evidence is like insurance, you only need it once, but you'd better have it ready. That afternoon, I drafted a notice of unauthorized access and forgery allegation. Old habits die hard. It wasn't a lawsuit yet, but it was a formal record addressed to the HOA board. I printed 2 copies, one for mailing, one for my binder. I knew Brenda would ignore it, maybe even laugh. That was fine. I wasn't sending it for her, I was sending it for the judge who'd eventually read it. Then something strange happened. Around 4 p.m., a UPS van pulled up. The driver handed me an envelope embossed with the HOA seal. Inside, notice of community event fine. Non-compliance with HOA-sanctioned neighborhood celebration constitutes violation of Section 14.3. Penalty accrues at $2,000, day beginning immediately. No letterhead, no signature, no date stamp from county approval. Just a printout of the HOA bylaws stapled to the fine notice. I laughed out loud again. They were escalating faster than a toddler losing an argument. I called Jerry, the only neighbor with common sense. "Jerry, you heard anything about a party that was supposed to happen at my place, buddy," he said, his Carolina drawl thick with disbelief. "She told everyone at the HOA email chain that you volunteered. Even said you graciously offered your beautiful lake home for the community. She's been bragging about it all week. Did she mention how she got in?" I asked. He hesitated. "Well, she told folks she had your spare keys. Said you dropped them off during the landscaping approval meeting. That made my blood run cold. There was no landscaping meeting. I never gave her keys, which meant she'd either copied them from the contractor's set or picked the lock. Either way, that crossed from HOA nonsense into felony territory. Jerry must have heard the shift in my breathing. "Ethan, you're not going to let this slide, are you?" I smiled to myself, the kind of smile only a man with receipts can afford. Not this time. That night, I wrote down 2 phrases in my legal pad, underlined twice. How to prove it, how to break them legally. Then I mapped out my strategy like a closing argument. Step 1. Establish forgery of contract. Evidence metadata mismatch, email timestamps. Step 2. Prove false accusation of agreement. Evidence doorbell logs witness testimony from Jerry. Step 3. Document harassment and defamation. Evidence HOA fine notices emails, flyers, if any appear. Step 4. Capture, conspiracy or sabotage attempts. Evidence security footage, audio logs, text records. It wasn't about revenge, it was about precision. Revenge is emotional. Litigation is surgical. By midnight, my binder was 2 inches thick, tabbed by color: red for forgery, blue for correspondence, yellow for surveillance, green for personal notes. The old part of me, the lawyer who could dismantle a witness with 1 misplaced comma, was awake again. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. A new email from Brenda's official HOA address: "Mr. Cole, it's disappointing that you're resisting community unity. Your continued hostility will reflect poorly in the minutes of our next meeting." I actually snorted. Community, unity, the audacity. I typed back 2 words: document everything, and hit send. The next morning, Trish sent me a follow-up. She'd spoken to an old coworker in the county clerk's office. Apparently, Brenda had requested copies of event permits 2 weeks ago for a property matching my address. The clerk denied her because the name didn't match the deed, so she simply made her own approval letter. I had my next exhibit. Brenda didn't just fake a contract, she tried to impersonate the county. That's when I realized this wasn't about an event at all. This was about control. Brenda wasn't throwing a party, she was asserting dominance, making a grieving widower bend to her HOA empire. She thought I'd crumble under social pressure, but she didn't know who she was playing with. That evening, I stood in my workshop sanding the last board of my new bookshelf when my phone buzzed again, security alert motion detected at the garage. I opened the live feed. 2 men I didn't recognize were rattling the door handles, whispering something about checking power lines. Then they walked off toward the street, where a familiar silhouette waited under a street lamp. Brenda's treasurer, Ed Navarro. The mic on my camera picked up his voice clearly. "Karen, Brenda said he's not going to open up. Maybe we cut the power on event day. He'll give in once the lights go out." I stopped breathing for a second. Then I smiled, a cold, quiet smile. They'd just gone from harassment to criminal conspiracy. I exported the video, saved a copy to cloud, and labeled it Exhibit E: Attempted Property Sabotage. As I sat there watching the footage replay, I realized how poetic it was. Brenda wanted to control my lights. Instead, she just shined a spotlight on herself, and the show was only getting started. By sunrise, the HOA had officially declared war, though, as always, they did it with polite letterhead and passive-aggressive smiles. I walked to my mailbox expecting bills. What I found instead was a thick envelope stamped Urgent, Community Matter. Inside were 3 documents: a formal HOA complaint, a bylaw violation notice, and an invitation to resolve amicably. It was a masterpiece of fake civility, the kind that pretends to negotiate while tightening a noose. The letter claimed I had voluntarily agreed to host the annual Welcome Committee event, but had subsequently withdrawn in a manner inconsistent with good faith. Good faith. That phrase stuck out like rust on chrome. Brenda had used it like a weapon to make me sound unreasonable. But the last line was the dagger: failure to comply may result in property access suspension, fine escalation, and HOA legal action. Property access suspension. They were threatening to block me from the very community roads I technically helped fund through property taxes. That's when I realized this wasn't just Brenda's personal vendetta, it was the board itself circling the wagons around their queen. I brewed my coffee, sat at the dining table, and read it again slowly. Most people would panic. I smiled. Because legally it was a disaster for them. The HOA had just put their threats in writing attached to a forged event and mailed it through the U.S. Postal Service, which meant mail fraud. Brenda had officially upgraded her petty tyranny into a federal offense. I called Trish. "You're going to love this," I said. "They just threatened to restrict my property access over a non-existent event. I'm thinking of framing it." She laughed, but her tone turned serious. "Uncle, keep the envelope. The postmark's your timestamp. That's hard evidence of malicious intent." "I already laminated it," I replied. After hanging up, I sat back and looked around the house. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, glinting off Eleanor's urn. For a second, I felt her calm presence again, that quiet steadiness she used to have when everything went wrong. "You'd tell me to stay calm," I whispered, "to let them bury themselves. So that's what I did. I didn't rant. I didn't show up at their meeting in a fury. I waited. Because every HOA tyrant eventually overplays their hand, and Brenda was about to play hers. That afternoon, I received an email blast sent to all residents of Maple Point. The subject line read, "Community clarification regarding Mr. Cole's property." Oh, this was going to be good. The email started with mock compassion. "We understand there's been some confusion before sliding into public humiliation." Brenda wrote that I had initially volunteered my home for the neighborhood event, but had become increasingly uncooperative. Then she added, "Out of respect for his recent loss, we have decided to relocate the event. Please be patient with Mr. Cole during this difficult time." That one sentence was calculated poison. She turned her fraud into a mercy narrative, painting herself as the compassionate neighbor extending grace to a broken widower. Within an hour, my inbox filled with messages from residents. "Sorry you're having a rough time. I understand grief. Take care of yourself. Maybe once you're feeling better, we can host something together." It was brilliant social manipulation. She'd isolated me, made me look unstable without ever saying the word. I poured myself another cup of coffee and opened a new document titled Exhibit F, Public Defamation Record. Every email, every timestamp, every word of her sympathy was going into the file. Because I wasn't just fighting forgery anymore, I was fighting character assassination. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Wednesday night at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. I hadn't planned to attend, but when Jerry texted me a photo of the agenda item #3, discussion of homeowner noncompliance, Cole residents, I knew my name was on trial, so I showed up. The clubhouse smelled like lemon cleaner and desperation. 12 board members sat at a long table, Brenda at the head wearing a pearl necklace that gleamed like a warning sign. I took a seat in the back, binder in hand. They spent 20 minutes discussing lawn violations and speed bumps before Brenda cleared her throat dramatically. And lastly, the issue regarding Mr. Cole's recent misunderstanding with the Welcome Committee event. She smiled at me, a politician's smile, all teeth, no warmth. "Ethan, we all sympathize with what you've gone through. But we must remember this community thrives on participation. You can't just ignore bylaws because of personal issues." I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room shift toward me. Decades in courtrooms had trained me for this moment, that perfect silence before the first strike. "Brenda," I said evenly, "I'd like to address that misunderstanding." Her smile faltered. "Of course, but briefly. We have other business. It'll be short, I promised. I just want to clarify the facts." I walked to the front table and placed my binder down with a soft thud. Then, one by one, I began pulling out printed exhibits. "This," I said, holding up the forged rental contract, "is the document you sent to a catering company under my name." Notice, the metadata created March 15th, sent April 10th. You forged a digital signature before you ever asked permission. Gasps rippled across the room. Brenda's jaw tightened. Next, I continued laying down screenshots of my Nest footage. Here's 60 days of doorbell video. No record of you or anyone from this board visiting my home to obtain verbal consent. A man at the end of the table, Ed Navarro, the treasurer, shifted in his chair. And here I said, sliding forward a printed HOA email as your official notice fining me $2,000 per day. Since it's attached to a forged document and mailed via USPS, that constitutes mail fraud under federal law. Silence. You could hear the fluorescent lights hum. Then Brenda laughed a brittle, nervous laugh. Ethan, this is ridiculous. You can't threaten legal action over a neighborhood party. I smiled faintly. No, Brenda, you did that when you forged my signature. She tried to pivot, waving toward the other board members. Everyone here knows we sometimes use informal agreements. It's tradition. Then you won't mind, I said, flipping to a new tab that I submitted a public records request for every event permit this HOA has filed in 10 years. You've never hosted anything on private property. Not once. Someone at the far end whispered, "She's lying." The power shifted in that exact moment. I didn't need to yell. I just closed my binder, looked at her calmly, and said, "You can't vote against gravity, Brenda, and forged contracts fall the same way." Then I turned and walked out. I didn't look back, but I heard the murmur of panic spreading through the board. Jerry texted me 5 minutes later, "You left a crater. Half the room looks like they just saw a ghost. Karen's fuming." Good. Let her stew. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Because the next morning, Brenda launched her counterattack. I woke to find another envelope wedged in my mailbox, 2 pages typed and neatly formatted. The first page was titled, "A Sincere Apology." It was anything but. "Dear Mr. Cole," it read, "I regret any misunderstanding regarding the event at your residence. Our records may have been confused due to your initial expressions of interest." Expressions of interest, that was a new one. But the second page, that's where she buried the hook. "To resolve this matter, please sign the attached acknowledgement form confirming that no malice was intended and that the HOA acted under the belief of prior consent. Once signed, all fines will be waived." It was a trap perfectly baited. If I signed, it would legally confirm her version that some agreement had once existed. I'd be confessing to something I never did. So I grabbed a thick black marker, wrote "Nice try" across the page in bold letters, scanned it, and filed it under Brenda's fake apology. Then I poured myself another cup of coffee and waited for her next move. Because when people like Brenda start losing power, they don't surrender, they self-destruct. And I was going to make sure every single piece of shrapnel was properly labeled, time-stamped, and ready for Exhibit G. The next few days felt eerily calm, the kind of stillness that settles before a thunderstorm. Brenda had gone quiet, no new fines, no snide emails, which only meant one thing: she was regrouping. When a manipulator goes silent, it's never because they've given up. It's because they're sharpening their next blade. Sure enough, by the weekend, Jerry knocked on my door with a newspaper folded under his arm and a look that said, "You're not going to believe this." On the front page of the Maple Point Gazette, right under the headline about lake cleanup efforts, was a cheerful photo of Brenda shaking hands with the mayor. The caption read, "Community leader continues to inspire neighborhood unity." But Jerry pointed at the sidebar, a smaller column titled, "Dispute over Lake Mansion, Event Sparks Controversy." There it was, my name in print buried between selective quotes. According to the article, I had expressed confusion over the HOA's event scheduling process, but acknowledged past conversations with the board. I hadn't said a word to any reporter. Brenda had fed them a statement. She wasn't just playing HOA politics now, she was rewriting the public record. "Want me to call my buddy down at the county clerk's office?" Jerry asked. "He hates her guts." "Not yet," I said. "Let her talk. The higher she climbs, the harder the fall." I closed the door and returned to my desk, pulling my binder closer. I was done reacting. It was time to go on offense. That Monday evening, the HOA held its monthly board meeting, the first since our dramatic showdown. I arrived early, binder under one arm, wearing a clean button-down and the same calm face I used in depositions. The clubhouse buzzed with whispered gossip. Residents were there not for the lawn budget or pool fees, they wanted blood. Brenda sat at the head of the table in her signature white blazer pearl necklace, gleaming under fluorescent light. Her expression was poised, confident, maybe even smug. She probably believed she'd turn public opinion back in her favor. The meeting began with the usual procedural nonsense roll call approval of minutes-old business. Then Brenda cleared her throat and announced, "Before we begin, I'd like to address the ongoing misunderstanding with Mr. Cole. She looked at me with that fake sugary sympathy that always precedes a knife. Ethan, I think we can agree emotions have run high. The board truly regrets any miscommunication. To restore peace, we're proposing a community-wide vote to retroactively approve last month's event as a neighborhood-sanctioned activity. That way, all past discrepancies will be resolved. There it was her final move. She wanted to rewrite history by vote. I stood slowly, binder in hand. Brenda, may I speak? She nodded, perhaps expecting an outburst. Instead, I smiled. Of course. I'd just like to make sure the record reflects accuracy. I opened my binder, slid out a fresh set of documents, and began distributing copies to the attending members. My voice stayed steady, calm, deliberate, surgical. What you're holding, I said, is a certified record from the Maple County Clerk's office. It lists all temporary event permits issued for our subdivision in the last decade. You'll notice not a single one was issued for private property. Not mine, not anyone's. A few heads turned. Brenda stiffened. Now I continued flipping a page. This second sheet is an email chain between Brenda and the catering company. Notice the creation date on the attached PDF, March 15th. Yet her first email to me requesting permission was April 9th, meaning she forged my signature before ever asking. Murmurs filled the room. Someone muttered, "That's illegal." Brenda tried to cut in, her voice tightening. "Ethan, this isn't a court of law. You can't just—" I raised a hand politely. "You're absolutely right, Brenda. It isn't. But it will be soon. So I'd prefer to give everyone here a preview of what your testimony will sound like under oath." The silence that followed was electric. I stepped closer, lowering my tone so that the room leaned in. "You forged a contract, entered my home without consent, weaponized the HOA's bylaws, and mailed me a fake fine through Federal Postal Service channels. That's mail fraud, trespassing, and forgery. 3 crimes. I could stop there, but then you chose to defame me publicly." Her lips parted, eyes darting toward her allies at the table. None met her gaze. "And for that," I said, "you'll find the defamation statutes listed in Section 1 to 540.1 of North Carolina Civil Code. I made copies for everyone." A soft rustle filled the room as I placed the printouts neatly on the table. Then I looked Brenda dead in the eye. "You've spent months trying to make me look unstable. You forged peace to hide your corruption, but you forgot who you were dealing with. I built this house from the ground up. You really thought I wouldn't build my defense the same way I snapped the binder shut." Meeting adjourned. I didn't wait for permission. I turned and walked out, the sound of whispered chaos trailing behind me. Jerry called an hour later. "You just dropped a nuke, buddy. Half the board's resigning. Brenda's been yelling in the parking lot for 20 minutes. I smiled, watching the lake shimmer outside my window. Let her scream. The lake doesn't echo nonsense. But Brenda wasn't done. She was too proud, too vain, too desperate. 2 days later, a new email blast went out from the HOA. Due to ongoing conflict with certain residents, the HOA is considering measures to ensure community harmony, including revision of property access bylaws. Property access. Again, that was their favorite threat. Only this time they made a fatal mistake. They copied the entire neighborhood, including several homeowners who despised Brenda's regime. Within hours, replies flooded in. "You can't restrict road access. This is getting insane. Why are you obsessed with this man's property?" It was digital mutiny. The following morning, I woke to find flyers taped to every mailbox, glossy printouts titled, "A Note from the HOA President." The letter painted me as an unstable recluse who had refused every attempt at reconciliation. She ended it with a smug line: "Some people just don't belong in communities." That line would cost her everything. I picked one flyer off my mailbox, laid it flat on my scanner, and labeled it Exhibit H, defamatory publication. Then I called an old colleague, Marcus Thorne, a retired trial attorney who'd once been my fiercest courtroom rival. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Ethan, haven't heard your voice since the Wilson case. You still making trouble. Apparently I'm the neighborhood menace now," I said. He chuckled. "Oh, you're in one of those HOA dramas, aren't you?" "Worse," I replied. "Mine forged a contract, broke into my home, and printed flyers calling me unfit for community life." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "I assume you documented everything." "I have an encyclopedia." "Then it's time," he said simply. "File the claim. Make it public. People like her only understand humiliation in front of a judge." That night, I sat by the window overlooking the lake binder open beside me. The water rippled with reflected moonlight, calm, steady, relentless. It reminded me of Eleanor. She used to say, Justice isn't about shouting the truth louder, it's about proving it quieter. I took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and whispered to her urn. All right, honey, let's finish what they started. The printer hummed to life, spitting out the first draft of the complaint, Cole v. Maple Point Homeowners Association, et al. Defendants HOA, corporate entity Brenda Markham, President Ed Navarro, Treasurer and Linda Carr, board member. Allegations: fraud, forgery, defamation, trespass, and civil conspiracy. Relief sought $100 0 inches damages plus attorney's fees. I stapled the pages, slid them neatly into the front pocket of my binder, and placed it on the kitchen counter beside my keys. Tomorrow morning, I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was the plaintiff. When you've spent decades in litigation, you learn one unshakable rule: never assume the enemy will stop digging once they've hit bottom. The smart ones stop. The arrogant ones keep going straight through the floor. Brenda and her cronies, they were still swinging the shovel. 2 days after filing my lawsuit, I came home from the courthouse to find a faint mechanical hum echoing from the garage. The power flickered once, then steadied. My gut twisted. I opened the side door carefully and saw a small utility drone hovering near the electrical panel, its camera light blinking red. At first I thought it belonged to the county, maybe inspecting lines. But the model was consumer grade, not municipal. On its undercarriage was a sticker: MP, HOA security. That was Brenda's next move: surveillance. I stepped inside, slowly, phone camera rolling. The drone drifted toward me, scanned the room, then zipped out through a cracked window like a guilty bird. A minute later, my security app pinged: garage door tampering detected. That was enough. I'd already seen what happens when arrogance meets paranoia, and now they'd crossed the threshold from nuisance to criminal trespass. I called Jerry. You got eyes on a drone, he snorted. You mean that flying bug she bought with HOA funds? Yeah. She uses it to check if lawns are within compliance. Jerry, I said evenly, if that drone crosses my fence again, it becomes evidence. Or firewood. He laughed. I'll bring the popcorn. That night I reinforced my house like a military outpost. Dave Morales, my retired electrician friend, came by with his toolbox. So we're building Fort Cole now, he joked, unrolling wires. Not a fort, I said. A courtroom with shingles. We installed a solar battery backup linked to my home's critical systems, fridge lights, and most importantly, the surveillance network. Then Dave bolted a steel lockbox over the main electrical panel, sealing it with a high-security padlock. I added one final layer, a motion-activated microcamera hidden inside the garage, pointed directly at the lockbox. It uploaded automatically to my cloud drive. Insurance, I told Dave. If they try to cut power, I'll have them on video committing a felony. He grinned. Brenda's not going to like this. That's the point. 3 nights later, the HOA decided to test my patience and my wiring. At 1:14 a.m., my backup system kicked on with a soft click. The house lights flickered, then stabilized. The grid outside had gone dark. My cameras switched to night vision automatically. On the monitor in my study, I saw them, 2 men in reflective vests, standing by the electrical pole outside the gate. They looked around, whispering. Then one of them pulled out a bolt cutter. And there at the end of the driveway stood Ed Navarro, the HOA treasurer, holding a flashlight and gesturing toward my house. The microphone on my gate camera picked him up clearly. She said to pull the line just long enough to teach him a lesson. He'll cave when the A divided by C dies. I froze the frame, zoomed in, and smiled. Caught. The next morning, I exported the footage, labeled it Exhibit I Attempted Property Sabotage, and uploaded copies to my secure cloud folder and a USB drive locked in a fireproof safe. Evidence redundancy, rule #3 of legal warfare. Then, as if the universe wanted to gift me one more nail for Brenda's coffin, I found another envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a formal notice of temporary power maintenance, printed on fake county letterhead, signed authorized by HOA utility liaison. There was no such position in the county. There was no such maintenance order. There was, however, a felony charge for impersonating a public officer. I couldn't help laughing. Oh, Brenda, I muttered. You just keep writing my closing argument for me. The following afternoon, Jerry came by holding a cold soda and a grin. You made the HOA Facebook group again. Want to see the circus? He handed me his phone. The post, written by Brenda herself, read, Attention neighbors, due to Mr. Cole's refusal to cooperate with necessary maintenance and his installation of unauthorized electrical systems, several residents experienced power fluctuations. We urge everyone to remain patient while we handle this delicate matter. I scrolled through the comments, a mix of angry emojis, confused neighbors, and one brave soul who wrote, "Isn't that illegal?" "She's panicking," I said, handing the phone back. "She's unraveling," Jerry corrected. "And you've got half the neighborhood rooting for you now. The rest just want the drama to keep going." "Then let's give them a show," I said. On Friday, I prepared my next move, a formal cease and desist notice, citing North Carolina statutes on harassment, surveillance intrusion, and attempted property damage. I mailed copies to the HOA board, the county sheriff, and the state attorney's office. The letter included still images from the security footage, Ed holding bolt cutters, the drone hovering in my garage, the forged utility notice. But that wasn't all. I sent a courtesy copy to the local newspaper reporter who'd published Brenda's Community Unity story. Subject line, "Follow up on your article. New evidence surfaces in HOA dispute. No commentary, no accusations. Just a clean list of facts and attachments. Because the truth doesn't need adjectives, it just needs airtime." By Monday morning, the story broke. Headline: HOA president accused of forgery, power tampering, and lakefront feud. Within an hour, Brenda's PR mask cracked like glass. The HOA office voicemail overflowed. Residents demanded explanations. One anonymous homeowner leaked internal HOA emails to the paper, showing Brenda had used HOA funds to buy the drone and community event decorations, a fancy way to say party supplies for a house she didn't own. That night, the board called an emergency executive session. I didn't attend, but Jerry did as an observer. He told me later that it was chaos. Ed tried to blame everything on Brenda, he said. Brenda called him a coward, Linda cried. And someone from the crowd yelled, "Maybe Ethan should run the HOA. You should have seen her face." I laughed. Not my circus, not my monkeys, but I'll take the popcorn. A few days later, I was in my workshop varnishing a new oak shelf when a soft knock came at the door. It was the sheriff, Deputy Rollins, a calm man with a kind smile. "Mr. Cole, mind if I step in for a minute?" "Of course," I said. He glanced around the room, eyes landing on my wall of labeled folders. "You weren't kidding in your complaint. That's the most organized evidence I've seen outside a courtroom. Old habits," I said. He nodded. "We've reviewed the footage. That power tampering incident, definitely criminal. We'll be forwarding it to the DA. Also, we found that drone registered under HOA funds, the purchase came from their joint account." I raised an eyebrow. "And the fake utility notice," he smirked, "printed from Brenda's office printer. County IT traced the metadata." I couldn't help myself. I laughed until tears stung my eyes. "You ever seen someone forge so many things they accidentally forge their own downfall?" He chuckled. "Not often. But I'll say this, she's in deep." That evening, the neighborhood was strangely quiet. No more flyers, no more gossip. Even the HOA's group email thread had gone silent. I sat on the porch with Jerry, the sunset painting the lake gold. "She's done, isn't she?" he asked. "Almost," I said. "The court date's in 2 weeks. Once the judgment hits, the HOA's insurance will panic, she'll resign, and peace will come crawling back." Jerry took a sip of his beer. "You ever think you'd be famous for suing an HOA?" I chuckled. "I spent 30 years suing corporations. This is just smaller-scale stupidity." He grinned. "Difference is this time, you're the hero." I looked out over the still water, my reflection rippling in the golden light. "Heroes don't collect evidence, Jerry. They collect closure." And as the crickets began their nightly chorus, I realized something. My house, once a place of grief, had become something else entirely. It was no longer just Eleanor's memory that lived here. It was proof, solid, quiet proof, that even in a world run by petty tyrants and paperwork bullies, calm persistence still wins. I'd built this home with my own hands. Now I was rebuilding my peace the same way, one nail, one clause, one recorded confession at a time. And when Brenda's kingdom finally crumbled, I'd be there not to gloat, not to yell, but simply to file the last piece of paper and close the case. Because justice, when done right, doesn't roar. It hums quietly, like a well-wired house after the storm passes. Saturday dawned clear blue, and impossibly calm, the kind of morning that tricks you into thinking nothing could go wrong. But I'd been in enough courtrooms to know that serenity was just the universe holding its breath. This was the day Brenda's community event was supposed to happen. According to her forged schedule, 100 guests, 2 catering crews, and a DJ would descend on my property at 2 in the afternoon. Except this time, the only person waiting for them was me. From my upstairs office, I had the perfect view of the driveway and the lake beyond. The air was cool, the sunlight sharp. I brewed a pot of black coffee, opened my laptop, and pulled up the live feeds from every camera. The monitors glowed: gate cam, porch cam, driveway cam, garage cam, all angles covered. At exactly 2:01 p.m., the first vehicle rolled into view, a van wrapped in neon decals that read Groove Masters Mobile DJ. The driver was young, maybe 25, wearing headphones in confusion. He parked beside the gate, stepped out and looked around. Then he tried the intercom. "Hey, this is the DJ for the Maple Point event. No one's answering the gate." I leaned toward the microphone but didn't press the talk button. Instead, I sipped my coffee and let the camera roll. Minutes later, 2 catering trucks pulled up, followed by a line of cars filled with guests in bright spring outfits. Families carrying casseroles, kids with balloons. The street turned into a traffic jam of expectation and gossip. They milled about near the gate, murmuring, glancing toward the mansion behind the wrought iron fence. And then came the red convertible, a cherry red BMW with the license plate HOA 1. Brenda. She stepped out like she was descending the steps of the Met Gala, flowy white dress, oversized sunglasses, fake smile glued on. Her entourage followed Ed Navarro and another board member, Linda Carr. Brenda waved grandly to the crowd, her voice syrupy sweet. "Don't worry, everyone. Mr. Cole's just a little late getting set up. You know how creative types are." A few chuckles rippled through the group. Someone clapped. She had always been good at turning manipulation into performance art. Then she looked at my gate and frowned. The padlock glinted in the sunday. Her smile faltered. "Ed," she hissed, "why is the gate locked?" He shrugged, sweating already. "I don't know, Brenda. Maybe he's still being difficult." Her jaw tightened. She pulled out her phone and dialed. Inside the house, my landline rang once, twice, 3 times. I didn't answer. She redialed. Again and again. Finally, she left a voicemail, dripping with venom disguised as charm. "Ethan, darling, I know you're there. You really don't want to make this harder than it needs to be. The entire neighborhood is waiting. Open the gate and let's not make a scene." Too late for that, I thought. At 2:40 p.m., the police arrived. A single squad car rolled down the street and parked behind the DJ van. 2 officers stepped out, calm, weary, and clearly used to HOA theatrics. Brenda practically sprinted to them, gesturing wildly toward my property. From my upstairs window, I could hear her voice float across the lawn. "He's violating community bylaws. He agreed to host this event, and now he's holding the neighborhood hostage behind that ridiculous gate." The younger officer sighed and approached the intercom. "Sir, this is the police. Could you come to the gate, please?" I grabbed my folder, my favorite one, black leather with silver tabs, and walked downstairs. My heart rate was steady, my breathing slow. The law doesn't reward anger, it rewards precision. I opened the front door and stepped out into the warm light. "Afternoon, officers," I said pleasantly. "Mr. Cole," one of them asked. "That's me." The older officer cleared his throat. "We got a call about an HOA dispute regarding an event at your residence." "Ah, yes," I said, flipping open my binder. "Would you like the short version or the one with exhibits?" They exchanged a glance. "Let's start short. Brenda Markham. I forged my digital signature on a rental contract to host this very event, fabricated a county approval letter, and entered my property without consent. She's also been fined for trespassing and is currently a defendant in an ongoing civil case. I have video evidence, metadata proof, and a letter from the sheriff's office confirming an active investigation into power tampering." The officers blinked. The younger one scribbled notes. The older one asked, "Do you have documentation?" I handed over copies of my top 4 exhibits: the forged contract with metadata timestamps, the fake utility notice, the HOA fine letter, and a still image of Ed caught on my camera near an electrical panel. They skimmed through the pages in silence. Behind them, Brenda was still performing for her audience. "He's unstable," she called out. "He's making up stories. He even sent letters to the newspaper." The older officer raised a hand, silencing her. "Ma'am, I'd recommend you stop speaking for now." Brenda froze, eyes wide. He turned back to me. "Mr. Cole, everything here seems clear. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. You have every right to keep your gate locked. We'll be documenting that for the record." I nodded. Appreciated, officers. When they walked back to Brenda, I followed at a polite distance, camera still recording from my phone. The conversation was short, but it hit like a hammer. "Ma'am, the officer said there's nothing illegal about a homeowner locking his gate. We suggest you disperse the crowd and find another venue." The color drained from her face. "You can't just—" "We can," the officer said, slipping his notepad into his pocket. "And we are." The officers left, and so did the first wave of guests. One by one, the cars started reversing down the narrow road. The DJ packed up his van. The caterers loaded their trays. Confused whispers floated through the air like pollen. Within 30 minutes, the street was empty except for Brenda Ed and a handful of humiliated board members. She stood there trembling with fury, staring at the locked gate. Then she did something I'll never forget. She turned toward the remaining guests and shouted, "This man is a liar. He's dangerous. He needs to be removed from our community." Her voice cracked on the last word. I stepped forward just far enough for the camera to catch me. "Brenda," I said softly, "the only thing getting removed here is your title." She spun on her heel and stormed off. That evening, Jerry texted me, "Check your email. HOA meltdown. You'll love this." He'd forwarded me a thread from the HOA's internal mailing list, Brenda's final desperate act. In it, she accused me of defamatory interference, claimed I was harassing volunteers, and even suggested that the HOA take collective action to have me declared a nuisance homeowner. The responses were brutal. "Enough, Brenda. You forged his signature. Resign before this gets worse." The final reply came from Linda Carr, the same board member who'd been standing behind Brenda that afternoon. "I will not be part of this anymore. This entire fiasco is on you." And just like that, the mutiny was official. Later that night, I sat in my study watching the moonlight ripple across the lake. The house was quiet, except for the steady hum of the security system, my orchestra of peace. I thought about Eleanor, about the way she used to say, "Truth takes its time, but it always finds the door." I smiled. "Well, honey," I murmured, "it just kicked it open." Because Brenda's empire of intimidation, the fines, the threats, the gossip had collapsed in the span of a single afternoon. The guests who once cheered her now whispered her name with pity. Her power had always depended on fear, and fear evaporates fast when exposed to daylight. Tomorrow I would walk into court not as the quiet widower she thought she could push around, but as the man who documented every lie she ever told. And for the first time since I'd moved to Maple Point, the silence of the lake didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. By Monday morning, the HOA drama had transformed from neighborhood gossip into a full-blown legal event. The Maple County Courthouse, usually a sleepy beige building that handled traffic tickets and zoning disputes, was about to host something far juicier. Cole v. Maple Point Homeowners Association. I arrived early, binder in hand suit, pressed calm as still water. After decades of practicing law, this felt almost nostalgic, like coming home, except this time I wasn't the hired sword. I was the client, the victim, and the executioner all in one. When I walked through the courthouse doors, I caught a glimpse of Brenda sitting at the defendant's table with her attorney, a slick-haired man named Gregory Luntz. He looked like the kind of lawyer who practiced smirking in the mirror. Beside him sat Ed Navarro, staring at his shoes, and Linda Carr, who looked like she wanted to melt into her chair. Jerry was already in the back row of the gallery, holding a coffee and wearing his favorite retired and reckless ball cap. When he saw me, he gave a slow nod, the kind of silent salute that says time to end it. The judge entered at 9:00 sharp. Judge Amanda Miller, a sharp-eyed woman known for her zero tolerance for nonsense. I'd argued in front of her once before, years ago, in a construction fraud case. She'd been as direct as a nail gun. Perfect. "Good morning," she said, glancing over her glasses. "We have one case on the docket, Cole versus Maple Point HOA et al. Both parties ready. Ready, Your Honor," I said. Luntz straightened his tie. "Ready for the defense." Judge Miller scanned the complaint file. "Mr. Cole, you're representing yourself." "Yes, ma'am." "Old habits die hard." She smiled faintly. "Proceed. You have 5 minutes." 5 minutes. That was all I needed. I walked to the podium, placed my binder down, and looked at the judge, not the defendants. "Your Honor, I began this case isn't about a misunderstanding. It's about a deliberate pattern of fraud, trespass, and defamation executed by individuals who believed that authority gave them immunity." I opened the binder and slid 4 labeled folders to the clerk. "Exhibit A through D, Your Honor." I held up the first one. "Exhibit A, the forged rental contract. Note the creation date, March 15th, and the email in which Miss Markham sends it, dated April 10th. The document existed before the supposed verbal agreement. That's impossible unless the intent to forge came first." Judge Miller nodded. "Go on. Exhibit B, security footage showing no HOA representatives ever visited my home during that period. So their claim of a verbal consent is provably false." I flipped the next tab. Exhibit C, publicly distributed flyers calling me unstable and uncooperative. That constitutes malicious defamation under State Statute 1-540.1. Then the last one. Exhibit D, video footage of HOA Treasurer Ed Navarro conspiring with 2 individuals to tamper with my electrical system. They said, and I quote, "cut the power. He'll cave when the air conditioning goes off." That's not just harassment, that's criminal sabotage. The courtroom went silent except for the rustle of papers. I didn't need theatrics. I let the evidence speak. I looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, this isn't about a house. It's about the illusion of power. They thought they could bully a widower, forge his name, and hide behind bylaws. But the law doesn't bend to bullies, it bends back." Then I stepped aside. The evidence rests. Luntz rose, his smirk cracking. "Your Honor, these allegations are grossly exaggerated." The plaintiff, Judge Miller, raised a hand. "Mr. Luntz, don't waste my time unless you're disputing the authenticity of the exhibits." Luntz faltered. "Well, no, but..." "Then sit down." He obeyed. The judge turned to Brenda. "Miss Markham, did you author this document?" She pointed to the forged contract. Brenda's lips trembled. "Your Honor, I believed I had consent. It was all a miscommunication. Did you sign this document using Mr. Cole's digital signature?" Her eyes darted to her attorney, who whispered something she clearly didn't want to repeat. "Yes, but Judge Miller's tone sliced through her excuse. Then you committed forgery. Whether you believed you had consent is irrelevant." The room was so quiet I could hear the courthouse clock ticking. Judge Miller flipped through the exhibits with practiced speed, her expression hardening with each page. When she reached the photo of the forged utility notice, she froze. "Who authorized this fake county document?" Brenda's silence was answer enough. The judge leaned back, her voice steady but cold. "Mr. Luntz, unless you have a miracle hiding in your briefcase, I've seen enough." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "No, Your Honor." "Then here's my ruling." She picked up her gavel but didn't strike it yet. "This court finds the defendants, Maple Point HOA, Miss Brenda Markham, Mr. Navarro, and Miss Carr, jointly and severally liable for damages in the amount of $100,000. The court further recommends referral to the district attorney's office for potential criminal review of forgery and document tampering. Bang! The gavel struck like thunder, and just like that, it was over. 3 minutes, exactly as I'd promised. The courtroom erupted in stunned murmurs. Luntz looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. Ed slumped in his chair. Linda buried her face in her hands. And Brenda, poor delusional. Brenda just stared at the judge in disbelief, her entire empire crumbling faster than one of her HOA newsletters. As I packed my binder, Judge Miller gave me a faint smile. "You still build a solid case, Mr. Cole." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. "These days I prefer houses, but old skills die hard." She chuckled softly. "Apparently not." Outside, the courthouse reporters waited. I hadn't expected them, but the local paper had turned the story viral after the power tampering scandal. Microphones pointed at me like rifles. "Mr. Cole, how does it feel to win against your HOA? Do you plan to press criminal charges? What's next for you?" I stopped at the top of the courthouse steps. "What's next?" I said. "Peace and quiet. That's all I ever wanted. And maybe a little reminder to anyone listening, don't sign someone's name unless they're standing in the room." Then I walked down the steps, ignoring the flashes of cameras. Jerry was waiting by his pickup, grinning from ear to ear. 3 minutes, huh? You weren't kidding." "Never am," I said. He slapped my shoulder. "Well, drinks are on me tonight. The whole neighborhood's celebrating. They're calling it the Great HOA Collapse of Maple Point." "Catchy," I said, smiling. But inside, I wasn't celebrating. I just felt still. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just quietly, perfectly still. Because the real victory wasn't the money or the headlines. It was the silence that followed. 2 weeks later, the HOA called an emergency meeting without Brenda. She'd resigned via email, citing personal reasons. Ed stepped down as treasurer the same day. Linda apologized publicly and offered to testify if the DA pursued charges. Jerry was unanimously elected as interim president. His first act, a motion to rewrite the bylaws. Rule 1, he announced, reading from a clipboard at the first post-Brenda meeting. "No HOA event shall ever take place on private property without notarized written consent from the homeowner. Unanimous vote required." The room erupted in applause. Jerry glanced over at me in the back row. "That one's called the Cole Clause," he said with a grin. Back home, I stood on the porch watching the sun set over the lake. The reflection shimmered like polished gold. I'd just finished building a new oak bookshelf for my study, the final piece of my long, strange therapy. On the top shelf, I placed 2 things, Eleanor's urn and the gavel-shaped paperweight Judge Miller had gifted me as a memento. I looked at both and whispered, "You'd laugh at all this, honey. You'd say I couldn't even retire without turning it into a trial." And maybe she was right. Maybe peace for me had always been found not in silence but in resolution. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, sat in Eleanor's favorite chair, and watched the water darken as evening fell. Maple Point was quiet again, the kind of quiet I'd worked my whole life to earn. This time it wasn't just a house, it was a verdict. The morning after the verdict felt different. Not triumphant, not loud, just clean. The kind of silence that follows after a storm finally clears. The lake shimmered like glass, the air carried the faint scent of pine and victory. But peace never arrives without a receipt, and Maple Point was about to get theirs. The HOA, as a corporate entity, now owed $100 0 inches damages jointly and severally with Brenda and her accomplices. That meant they'd have to pay all of it together or separately. And because the HOA's insurance didn't cover fraud or forgery, the money would have to come straight from the homeowners. The irony wasn't lost on me. Brenda's followers, the very people who once whispered that I was unstable, now had her to thank for the largest special assessment in neighborhood history. By Tuesday, the emails began. Subject: Special HOA Meeting. Emergency Assessment Discussion. From Acting President Jerry Collins. To all residents. Due to the recent court ruling, the HOA must satisfy a legal judgment of $100 000. Each household will be temporarily assessed $1.250 to meet payment obligations. We understand the frustration and will address future structural changes at the meeting. It was the most diplomatic email Jerry had ever written, but it landed like a grenade. Within an hour, Maple Point's private Facebook group, usually a polite parade of lost dogs and gardening tips, erupted into chaos. Why do we have to pay for Brenda's lies? Can we sue her personally? This is highway robbery. I warned everyone about her last year. The outrage was glorious. For once, the mob wasn't at my gate. I sat on the porch, sipping coffee, scrolling through the comments. It was like watching a jury deliberate in real time, except this time the verdict was unanimous. Brenda was done. By Wednesday afternoon, she'd vanished. Literally. The for sale sign went up in front of her house overnight, and a moving truck appeared before sunrise. She didn't even say goodbye. Rumor had it she was relocating to Florida to be closer to family, though Jerry joked closer to her lawyer's office, more like, I wanted to feel vindicated, but what I felt instead was something quieter relief. Because her departure wasn't just the end of a feud, it was the removal of a disease. The gossip, the fear, the passive-aggressive finds it all evaporated with her nameplate on the HOA office door. Still, Maple Point needed to heal. And healing, I knew, always started with reform. At the emergency HOA meeting that Friday, the clubhouse was packed. Jerry stood at the podium looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. He wasn't a politician, and that's exactly why people trusted him. All right, folks, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Let's get this over with. We're paying the judgment first, no arguments. After that, we're voting on new bylaws. A voice shouted from the crowd, What about Brenda? Can't we sue her back? Jerry nodded. We can, and we will. But right now we're cleaning up her mess, one step at a time. I watched from the back, leaning against the wall binder under my arm like a habit I couldn't break. When Jerry finished, he gestured toward me. Before we move to new business, Ethan has something to say. I hadn't planned to speak, but something in the room pulled me forward. I walked up to the front, slowly feeling every eye on me. Most of you know me as the guy who sued your HOA, I began. Some of you probably still don't like me for it. That's fine. But what happened here wasn't about money, it was about accountability. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Brenda used power as a weapon, I continued. She treated rules like her personal hammer. And when someone stood up to her, she didn't apologize, she forged, she lied, and she doubled down. What I did wasn't revenge. It was a message. That nobody, not even an HOA president, gets to rewrite someone else's life on paper. Silence. Not awkward silence, respectful silence. I built my house with my own hands. Every nail, every board. When she tried to turn it into a prop for her ego, I defended it the same way. I built it methodically, lawfully, one piece at a time. And that's all I'd ever want for this place, to be a community, not a kingdom. Someone in the back started clapping, then another. Soon the room joined in, not thunderous applause, but enough to mean something. Jerry smiled. Well said. Now let's fix this neighborhood for good. Over the next few weeks, Maple Point transformed. The HOA restructured its bylaws from top to bottom. Every contract required dual verification. Every expense demanded transparency. They even added a new standing rule, the coal clause prohibiting any HOA activity on private property without a notarized owner-signed agreement. Jerry insisted on naming it that. I told him not to, but he said, You earned it. I didn't argue. As for Brenda's house, it sat empty for months. Grass grew tall, mail piled up. Eventually, a young couple bought it, a teacher and a firefighter. They repainted the shutters, blue replaced the porch swing, and introduced themselves at my gate with a homemade pie. Normal neighbors, real people, the kind of folks who don't weaponize clipboards. Then, one morning I received a certified letter. It was from the HOA's insurance company. Inside was a check my settlement payout minus legal fees and processing, $96,780 exact. I stared at the number for a while. To anyone else, it might have felt like a windfall. To me, it was closure on paper, the value of my piece quantified and signed in ink. I endorsed it quietly and drove to the local bank. The teller, a kid barely out of college, smiled nervously as he processed the deposit. "Big day, huh?" he asked. "Long one," I replied. "But it's over now." As I walked back to my truck, I realized something profound. Justice isn't about noise, it's about endurance. Brenda's voice had been loud, constant emails, threats, gossip, but it faded the moment she faced truth written in evidence. Truth doesn't shout, it simply stands and waits. That weekend, Jerry invited me down to the dock for a small barbecue. No board meetings, no agendas, just a few neighbors and the smell of grilled ribs floating across the lake. He handed me a cold beer. "So, what's next, Counselor Retired?" I said, laughing. "For real this time," he chuckled. "You sure? There's talk about you running for HOA president." I nearly choked. "Jerry, if I ever volunteer for that, push me into the lake." "Deal," he said, grinning. As the sun dipped below the trees, the lake turned gold again, just like the day Eleanor and I first dreamed of buying a house near water. I looked toward the reflection, feeling something warm and steady in my chest, a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. "You'd like it now," I murmured softly to her. Later that evening. No noise, no chaos. Just us again. For the first time in a long while, I slept through the night without waking to check my cameras. But before dawn, my phone buzzed a single text from Jerry. "She's back. Brenda's lawyer filed an appeal." I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes. My first thought wasn't anger or fear. It was calm, amusement. Because if there's one thing I'd learned from this entire ordeal, it's that arrogance always returns to the scene of its own defeat. And this time I'd be ready not with rage, but with documentation. I smiled, rolled over, and muttered to myself, "Guess I'll need a bigger binder." When Jerry's text came through, "She's back." Brenda's lawyer filed an appeal. I didn't even swear. The rage, the disbelief, the adrenaline of the first war had all burned out months ago. What replaced it was something quieter, heavier, but sharper too, understanding. Bullies don't stop because they're wrong. They stop because they run out of resources. Brenda must have found one last drop of gasoline left in her ego tank and decided to light another match. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed again, this time from Marcus Thorne, my old trial rival turned friend. "Morning Cole, saw the docket. She's appealing. Want me to handle it?" I smiled. "Marcus, this is a woman who got humiliated in 3 minutes flat. She's not appealing for victory, she's appealing for oxygen." "True," he replied, "but oxygen can still feed a fire. Let me put out the embers." And just like that, the machine whirred back to life motions, filed responses, drafted paperwork flying like confetti. Only this time, I wasn't doing it alone. A month later, the appellate hearing was held in Raleigh. Brenda didn't even show up, just her new attorney, a young, overconfident associate who clearly hadn't read the entire case file. I sat quietly in the back of the courtroom as Marcus handled the arguments with surgical precision. When the judge asked for supporting evidence, Marcus smiled and said, "Your Honors, we'd like to submit the transcript of the original trial." The entire case was resolved in 3 minutes. For one simple reason, facts don't require repetition. The panel laughed, a good sign. The appeal was dismissed before Brenda's lawyer could even finish his opening statement. "Frivolous," the judge said flatly. And that was the end. For real this time. When the ruling came down, I didn't celebrate. I didn't even tell the neighbors. I just took a quiet walk along the lake at sunset, the water reflecting a fire-orange sky, and whispered to the ripples, "It's over, Eleanor. Finally over." But Maple Point didn't forget. The HOA's transformation after the scandal became something of a local legend. Other neighborhoods started copying the Cole Clause, and Jerry even got invited to speak at a statewide homeowners association conference. He tried to decline, but the other board members insisted. When he returned, he stopped by my house carrying a plaque that read, "Presented to Ethan Cole, for restoring integrity to Maple Point." "I didn't do it for recognition," I told him. He grinned. "That's why you deserve it." We hung it on the wall in my office, just above Eleanor's urn and below the framed gavel paperweight Judge Miller had given me. Now my study looked like a courtroom museum dedicated to poetic justice, the urn for memory, the gavel for verdict, the plaque for legacy. Summer came quietly. The neighborhood softened. Kids rode bikes down the street again, dogs barked at squirrels, and for once, nobody called code enforcement about lawn height. The HOA, under Jerry's leadership, had become exactly what it was meant to be: helpful, boring, invisible. Then one evening, a knock on my door. It was a woman I didn't recognize, mid-40s, neat blouse, cautious smile. "Mr. Cole," she asked. "Yes, ma'am. My name's Clara Weller. I'm the county clerk who processed your short-term rental approval years ago. You probably don't remember me. I remember every stamped form in that file," I said with a grin. "What can I do for you?" She hesitated. "Brenda reached out to me last year, asking about your paperwork. I told her she wasn't authorized to view it, and she got, well, let's just say unpleasant. I thought you'd want to know." I nodded slowly. "I figured as much. Thank you for doing the right thing," she smiled. "You made a lot of people in county records happy. That woman used to call every week demanding special treatment. It's been peaceful since she left." Peaceful. The word stuck in my chest like a pleasant echo. Weeks passed. Life became simple again: morning coffee, fishing on the dock, working in the shop. I built another bookshelf, this one smaller, meant for personal things. On its top shelf, I placed a single binder labeled Maple Point Closed Case. Sometimes I'd open it and flip through the pages: photos, printouts, legal documents, and that last glossy HOA flyer with my name slandered across it. It no longer made me angry. It just looked like evidence of evolution, the fossil record of a neighborhood learning humility the hard way. Jerry still stopped by every weekend, usually with some absurd HOA story from another town. "Did you hear about the one in Virginia?" he'd say. "President fined a guy $500 for having too many pumpkins on his porch. Ended up on the news." Pumpkins, I'd laugh. Gravity always wins, Jerry. Some lessons are seasonal. Then, one afternoon, a thick envelope arrived, postmarked from Florida. My first thought, don't tell me she's writing me again. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Mr. Cole, I know you don't owe me forgiveness, and I doubt you'll even read this, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I lost everything: my job, my home, my reputation. I've been through therapy. It turns out what I called community pride was really control. I hurt a lot of people, not just you. If you can believe it, I actually envy your calm. Maybe that's something I'll learn before I die. Brenda M." I stared at the letter for a long time, torn between disbelief and an emotion I didn't expect: pity. Because she was right. What she'd called leadership was really just fear wearing pearls. I folded the letter neatly, slipped it into the binder under appendix postscript, and closed it for the last time. That evening I walked down to the dock. The air was heavy with summer humidity, the sky streaked with pink and gold. Jerry was already there, feet dangling above the water. "You look like a man who's finally at peace," he said. "I think so," I replied. "Took me long enough." He grinned. "So what's next for Ethan Cole, defender of the quiet writing?" I said. "Maybe a book about all this. How to survive your HOA without losing your mind or your house." He laughed so hard he nearly dropped his beer. "Make sure to dedicate it to Brenda. She gave you the material." I smirked. "Oh, she'll get a chapter." We sat there in companionable silence for a while, watching the ripples stretch across the water. When the wind shifted, the reflection of my house shimmered, a sturdy shape framed by calm light. For years it had been my fortress, my courtroom, my proof. Now it was just home. And in that quiet moment, I realized something deeper than revenge or victory. Every fight worth winning teaches you who you are when the shouting stops. Brenda taught me that strength doesn't come from anger or from proving others wrong. It comes from documentation, patience, and the will to stay standing when someone tries to erase you. In the end, I didn't just protect my property. I protected the principle that no one, no HOA, no title, no bully has the right to invade your peace and call it community. I thought about Eleanor again, her laughter echoing faintly in memory. I could almost hear her teasing me. Only you would turn grief into a legal precedent. I smiled at the horizon. Guess I did, honey. Guess I did. The water was still. The house stood strong. The story for once was finished. I turned off the dock light, walked inside, and closed the door. Not in defense this time, but in contentment. You can't vote against gravity, you can't legislate peace, and you can't bully the truth forever. What Brenda and her HOA never understood is that justice doesn't need an audience, it just needs time, and a man who refuses to bow. I didn't win because I fought louder. I won because I documented quietly. Because when chaos shouts, calm becomes a weapon. So if you ever find yourself facing your own HOA, Karen, remember this: the calmest voice in the room often carries the heaviest hammer. And sometimes that hammer only takes 3 minutes to fall.